Hello there everyone, Seb here, this time with a review for Anima, Gate of Memory. Described as an action RPG and brought to us by the 3-man development team over at Anima Project and a whole army of Kickstarter backers. I'll be taking a look at the Steam version. Now before we dive into the game proper, please note that this title is based on the Spanish tabletop RPG Anima Beyond Fantasy. Prior to this game I had never even heard of it, so unfortunately I won't be able to tell you how closely it follows its lore or respects the established rule set. I can however say that I haven't learned too much about it for this game. It does hint at a greater world out there, but things are kept fairly well confined. So let's just focus on the things that are clear. You play as a girl who has lost everything as she formed a pact with a demonic-like creature, Ergo Mundus, whose essence is contained in a book she has been carrying around ever since. She doesn't even have a name anymore, she's just known as the Bearer of Calamities. She can control Ergo and let him out and play in a human-like form so he can act as your second playable character. This duo works for the Church of Nathaniel, and at the start of the game they are on the hunt for an artifact which a respected member ran off with. After a short-lived pursuit, they quickly find themselves trapped in the mysterious Tower of Arcane. This tower seems to have drawn in other powerful entities as well, each housed in their own mini-world modeled after their memories. This means that whilst you are stuck in this tower, you will still traverse very different terrain in your search for answers, because each world is quite distinctive. Each world also serves as a backdrop for a smaller story, which is discovered through collectible memories of the big guy in charge of that particular place. These stories are perhaps the most interesting story elements of the entire game and usually tell a tragic tale explaining how these folks turn to the dark side, or in most cases basically pitch blackness. It also makes the inevitable confrontations much more personal. For the most part, you'll be able to explore multiple worlds at the same time, making the game somewhat open-ended. As you conquer different areas, you'll be able to unlock and explore more of the tower. While each world can be completed in one go, there is plenty of optional content and collectibles hidden throughout that will lure you back to the different areas. It's a good thing then that the levels are built so well. Each world and even the different areas within feel very unique, not only in aesthetics but also in mechanics and overall layout, which made it a total joy to explore them. The game might not feature the highest graphical fidelity, it is a budget title after all, but even with the graphical limitation it is bound by, it paints some pretty pictures. This also holds true for the characters and in particular the enemies and bosses. They look great and they can feel quite menacing, which many in fact are. Accompanying the pretty imagery is a very nice soundtrack that delivers some fitting pieces. They just go really well with the different areas and situations you find yourself in, and I was rather surprised as to how good the soundtrack actually is. What's less stellar is the voice acting. Now personally I will always appreciate voice acting no matter the quality, so at least props for adding it. However, many hold to higher standards and in this case I feel a fair warning is in order. There's no two ways about it, the voice acting is just bad.
Unfortunately, I'm not finished with it yet. But don't worry, I've prepared something to entertain you and your creature. Goodbye forever, Bearer of Calamities.
Wait! Damn.
I get the impression that there has been very little direction as to how to convey and emote sentences, and this makes the quality of the lines rather inconsistent, few and natural, and generally rather bland. Whilst most voices are clear and of the same volume, I did notice some mild popping with a few. What also doesn't help is the piss poor script. Perhaps some things got lost in translation, but especially the banter in between our heroes is at times downright cringe-worthy. Just to give you some examples of the weird quirks you'll have to endure, the Bearer has this recurring weird demanding way of asking Ergo for suggestions.
Suggestions?
She also defaults to the retort of "shut up" all the frigging time.
Shut up!
Now admittedly you can easily see why she'd want her companion to keep his trap shut. You see, Ergo has this tendency to awkwardly call the Bearer babe or baby every chance he gets. And if that wasn't enough to make him feel uncomfortable, on a couple of occasions he actually makes some very suggestive and downright perverted remarks.
Hey baby. You know what the best part about this adventure has been so far? Banging against your ass for hours.
Not really the protagonist I had in mind. Now, he is constantly referred to as being a true monster, so in a way it does make sense to have him be this self-absorbed, disrespectful douchebag. However, such a character does not lend itself well for comedic relief, nor any attempt to make him more likable. At least not without openly acknowledging these serious flaws and doing something with them. As the game puts it, however, it just ends up feeling like we're supposed to just brush his uncomfortable nature under the rug and laugh it off. It doesn't work.
Money in the sky, I can launch them twice as high. Take a look, I'm in a book, you're reading ergo.
Cutscenes in which most of the talking actually takes place are also pretty disappointing in and of themselves. This is because it almost looks like the budget ran out and animation couldn't be done anymore because there is none. Everyone just talks while holding a certain static pose while the camera floats by, and this looks really awkward and cheap. Sometimes scenes are played out without these silly poses with static character models in the foreground instead. These feel so much better than these unfinished cutscenes that I've got to wonder why they didn't do all of the scenes in this style. But enough about presentation, let's talk about some actual gameplay now. As stated before, the game is presented as being an action RPG, though in actual gameplay I'd say it's mostly action based, much like games such as Devil May Cry. You have a basic attack which can be strung into a combo, a handy dodge maneuver, and you have 4 extra buttons to assign skills to, which may also vary based on context. To help you out, you can make use of a lock-on function, which can be very helpful indeed, though in a big crowd it can also be a bit of a hindrance as it will be harder to keep an overview and enemies have no trouble backstabbing you. Speaking about cameras, sometimes the game presents you with a static camera angle which can actually be quite helpful keeping an overview, but when it appears out of nowhere it can also be really disorienting. At any moment you can also switch out characters to sort of change things up, but also not really. This is because they practically play the same. Each character does have their own skill tree which you can invest points into, but most of the skills are nearly identical. There are small nuances per character that make them ever so slightly different, but you'd really have to look at very minute details to find these. Switching out characters is mostly handy for staying alive longer, or in theory linking skills together for some extra damage, even though I never really got the hang of that. To further customize your heroes, you can equip each with 2 weapons and 2 artifacts, which alter the statistics and possibly offer a passive bonus. Equipment is found all over the place and can be bought at the shop in the tower as well. You also find some consumable items, of which you can only carry a limited supply. These items can be assigned to the D-pad for quick access, but through some weird design choice, not quick use. I have no clue what the point is, but you have to keep the button pressed down for a bit in order to activate an item. Now, if this was a conscious gameplay choice, then fine, but using an item through the menu is instant, which makes it so much more practical, especially during heated battles. How said battles actually play out is also a mixed bag. The controls respond reasonably well and there is some nice variety in enemy patterns and way to counter these. There is some real creativity here and I love figuring out how to best beat each new foe I encountered. Especially the bosses are just awesome and have some great mechanics. You'll be in for some truly epic battles indeed. Sounds pretty sweet, right? Well, unfortunately a game can't just live on nice ideas alone. It also needs to work in execution and unfortunately here it starts to lose some points. I can count this game as one of very few to genuinely and royally piss me off. There are 2 major problems I have with it that just drain the fun right out of the experience for me on a couple of occasions. Whilst the controls and moves in themselves are responsive, they just don't flow well into one another at all. This makes it hard to make combos and you just have no hope of stringing together a nice set of stylish attacks along the lines of the aforementioned Devil May Cry. Especially the later skills just take way too long to execute to make them practical, and since there is also no way to cancel out of moves, they tend to function like giant glowing neon lights stating that you're ready to be murdered. So you have to commit to the moves you initiate, which makes things a bit more tactical. Now this would be fine, were it not that the enemies expect you to have split-second reaction times as they act upon those hypothetical neon signs, and they can be merciless in pelting you with attacks. So much so that on occasion they can actually stun lock you and just pummel you until they are stupid enough to allow you some room to breathe, or you're dead, whichever comes first. Now, luckily in most encounters this really isn't much of an issue, since with just a few enemies, which on their own are pretty much all pushovers, it plays fine enough. Occasionally you'll be facing a horde of enemies though, and that is when things get really frantic. But it's during the bosses that things get really unfair, and it's such a shame too because they are so cool. But the gameplay unfortunately just is not fully compatible with them. It's almost like putting the Vic Viper into a bullet hell shooter. The second thing that really got under my skin in this game are the jumping puzzles. I have no idea how developers in this day and age still think that adding these to their action game is a good idea, but they're here and boy what a piece of work they are. Now, don't get me wrong, I can enjoy platforming challenges, even hard ones, but please, for the love of all that is holy, build a good engine around it first for a proper implementation of the stuff. Don't just stick it in there with your existing engine. All the typical problems are accounted for here. You have to constantly battle the camera as you go, it's hard to judge depth, thus you'll often have trouble knowing your exact position in the air. To add some extra salt into the wounds, you'll be facing quite a few of these challenges, and of course they had to go and make them pretty hard too. Moving blocks? Check. Disappearing platforms? Check. Narrow ledges? Check. Timed sequences? Check. Bottomless pits? Check. Game out of window? I suppose the digital age came to your rescue here, game. In the end, I feel kinda divided on this game. I see that there's clearly been a lot of work put into it. Let's not forget that it's made by only 3 people. And I love the design. There's some really cool ideas in here. Still, its execution leaves something to be desired. The miniature stories found within can be interesting, however the overarching story is nothing special, and worst of all, the script is downright terrible, creating some very unlikable characters. Truly, the real calamity this barra carries is Ergo's personality. Another thing I want to kinda clear up here is that the developer seems to boast about player choices affecting the outcome. Whilst there are a total of 5 endings, which in itself is awesome, these have very little to do with actual choices found throughout your journey because there basically are none. So I find this a rather unfair claim. Basically, depending on when you find which end boss, you get a different ending. A rather minimal playthrough should take you about 15 hours to complete, and with a lot of secrets, multiple endings and New Game Plus, there is a lot of game on offer here. At just €20, it's not a bad price. Still, the issues I encountered are rather big, so if you are curious about the game, I actually recommend waiting out for a discount or possibly some updates that address these complaints. Just know that through its roughness there are quite a few shiny bits. You'll have to endure some frustration along the way though, as those rough bits will scrape away some of the top layers of your patience and tolerance. You know best how thick that skin of yours is. And with that I conclude this review. Finally! It only took me like what, 5 times to try and write everything down? I was so conflicted on it. But I do hope you've enjoyed this review, and if you do end up picking up this game, please let me know what you think about it. I'd love to hear your opinion. For now, as always, thank you very much for watching once again, and until next time, take care. Bye bye for now.